Mark had always been known for his generous heart and his special fondness for children. Since becoming an uncle, he had shown particular affection for his 5 nephews, the children of his older brother Andrew and his sister-in-law Karen. The children adored Uncle Mark, who always had a smile on his face and a fun story to tell. On the day of his wedding to Julia, Mark couldn't have been happier. The ceremony was beautiful, with the nephews participating adorably. The eldest, at 8 years old, proudly pushed the stroller with the youngest, just 9 months old. The 3-year-old twins walked hand in hand, while the 5-year-old girl scattered flower petals along the aisle. Seeing them, Mark felt his heart overflow with love. He embraced each of them tenderly, under the emotional gaze of the guests. Julia, his fiancée, was radiant in her white dress. She smiled, seemingly enchanted by the familiar scene. The couple seemed ready to build a life filled with love and joy together. The first months of marriage were calm and happy. Mark and Julia adapted to living together, making plans for the future. Often their nephews and nieces visited the couple, filling the house with laughter and noise. Mark loved these moments, but Julia sometimes seemed a little uncomfortable with so much noise. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Andrew called Mark asking if he could take care of the children for a few hours. The couple had some important matters to resolve and needed help. Mark, as always, agreed without hesitation. Julia frowned, but said nothing. The hours passed and the sun began to set. Mark played cheerfully with the children in the backyard, but a feeling of worry began to grow in his chest. Andrew and Karen should have already returned. The 9-month-old baby began to cry, missing her parents. Mark gently rocked her, trying to calm her. "Uncle Mark, when are Mum and Dad coming back?" asked the eldest, his eyes reflecting a mix of amusement and anxiety. "Soon, champ. They'll be here soon," Mark replied, forcing a reassuring smile. Night had completely fallen when the phone rang. Mark answered, his heart racing. The voice on the other end was grave and formal. In a few seconds, Mark's world collapsed. Andrew and Karen had suffered a terrible car accident. Neither of them survived. The days that followed were a blur of tears, hugs, and difficult decisions. The children, still not fully understanding what had happened, were cared for by different family members. Mark was present the whole time, offering comfort and unconditional love. After the funeral came the question that nobody wanted to ask. Who would take care of the children? The grandparents, although they loved their grandchildren, were not in good health to take on such a responsibility. It was then that Mark, with a heavy but determined heart, made a decision that would change his life forever. "Julia," he said, holding his wife's hands, "I want to take care of the children. They are my family, and I cannot abandon them." Julia remained silent for a long moment, her eyes revealing a mixture of emotions. Finally, she nodded slowly. "If this is what you want, Mark." The first days were an immense challenge. The children, still grieving, had difficulties adapting to the new reality. The oldest, now 9 years old, tried to be strong, but Mark caught him crying alone several times. The 4-year-old twins constantly asked when their parents would return, without understanding the finality of death. The 6-year-old girl had become quiet and withdrawn, while the baby, a little over a year old, cried constantly, missing the familiar embrace of his mother. Mark went out of his way to meet both the emotional and practical needs of each child. He spent sleepless nights consoling nightmares, changing diapers, and preparing bottles. He was the one who organised school routines, took them to school, helped with homework, and tried to create an environment of normalcy and safety for the little ones. Julia, on the other hand, seemed increasingly distant. She rarely interacted with the children, and when she did, it was in a mechanical and cold manner. Mark noticed her growing discomfort, but hoped that she would adapt to the new family dynamic over time. One night, exhausted after a particularly difficult day, Mark decided to talk to Julia. "Honey, I need you by my side on this journey. The children also need your support and love. I'm feeling overwhelmed and alone." Julia looked at him, her eyes cold and distant. "Mark, I married you. I have nothing to do with these children. This is not the life I envisioned when I married you. I don't even know if I want to have children, let alone these 5 children who aren't mine." Julia's words hit Mark like a punch in the stomach. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Julia, you married me, and this is my life now. Sometimes fate plays tricks on us, but we will overcome this moment with love." Mark believed that this frank conversation could open Julia's eyes to the importance of her involvement in the children's lives. He hoped that, with patience and mutual understanding, they could build a united and loving family. However, his hopes were brutally crushed a few days later. Upon arriving home after taking the children to school, Mark found Julia in the living room, surrounded by suitcases. His heart sank as he realized what was about to happen. "Mark, I'm leaving," Julia announced, her voice cold and determined. "One day you will come to your senses and realize that you won't be able to raise these children. When you finally give them up for others to raise, you know where to find me." Before Mark could fully process what was happening, Julia had already walked out the door, leaving him alone with 5 children to raise and a broken heart. The days that followed were the hardest of Mark's life. He had to explain to the children that Julia had left, dealing with yet another loss in their young lives. The eldest, with a maturity beyond their years, hugged Mark tightly and said, "Don't worry, Uncle Mark, we have each other." Those simple words, spoken with such sincerity, gave Mark the strength he needed to carry on. He dedicated himself entirely to raising his nephews, determined to give them all the love and stability he could. The years passed, bringing challenges and joys. Mark learned to braid hair, balance tight budgets, and be both mother and father to 5 growing children. There were nights of tears and days of laughter, moments of pride and instances of concern. But at every step of the way, Mark never regretted his decision. The children thrived under his care. The eldest became a responsible teenager and a protector of the younger siblings. The twins, although still mischievous, developed an admirable compassion for others. The middle girl discovered a passion for art, filling the house with her colourful creations. And the youngest, who barely remembered her biological parents, saw Mark as the most loving father she could wish for. 10 years had passed since that fateful day when Julia left. Mark, now with some grey strands at his temples, entered a restaurant for a work meeting. He was focused on some papers when a familiar voice called out to him, "Mark? Is that really you?" He looked up and saw Julia standing in front of him. Time had been kind to her. She was still beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, a mix of regret and curiosity. "Hello, Julia," Mark responded politely, inviting her to sit down. Julia settled in, her eyes scanning Mark's face as if searching for answers to unasked questions. I always hoped you would seek me out after I left," she finally said, her voice trembling. Mark watched her for a moment, recalling the pain and confusion he felt so many years ago. But now, looking at her, he only felt a calm acceptance. "Julia," he began softly, "I know you didn't marry a man with 5 children. Life isn't always as we plan, and those children needed me. You weren't by my side at that crucial moment. Imagine if it were an illness that struck me or an accident that incapacitated me. Would you abandon me then too? Unfortunately, at that moment, you proved that your love was only for the good times, but that in times of hardship, it couldn't endure." Julia opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a joyful commotion at the restaurant entrance. Mark looked over Julia's shoulder and his face lit up with a radiant smile. Entering the restaurant were the 5 children, now teenagers and young adults, accompanied by a kind-looking woman. The oldest, now an 18-year-old young man, led the group with confidence. The twins, at 13, still had that mischievous sparkle in their eyes. The middle girl, at 15, carried a sketchbook under her arm, and the youngest, a beautiful 10-year-old girl, ran ahead to hug Mark. "Dad, did we manage to surprise you?" she asked, her eyes shining with joy. Mark hugged her back, laughing. You certainly did, my love. He stood up, turning to Julia with a gentle smile. Julia, I must go now. My family and I have a commitment. I wish for you to find an unconditional love like I have found. As Mark walked away, embraced by his family, Julia watched him, a mix of emotions on her face. She saw the love and happiness radiating from that group, and for the first time in 10 years, she fully understood what she had lost. Contrary to what she thought, Mark managed to raise those 5 children. Mark left the restaurant surrounded by laughter and lively conversations. The woman accompanying them, Sarah, a teacher he met a few years ago who had become a loving partner and dedicated mother to the children, held his hand fondly. As they walked together down the sunny street, Mark reflected on the journey that brought him to this point. There were moments of doubt and difficulty, of course, but each challenge only strengthened the bonds that united them. He looked at each of the faces surrounding him, faces he had seen grow, change and mature over the years, and his heart overflowed with gratitude. Life, Mark thought, sometimes surprises us with unexpected events. But true love, the kind of love he discovered in this family he built, that love overcomes everything and lasts forever. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.